Hey guys, Raphael here, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Did you say podcast? Dudes, dudettes, you're listening to the podcast on the GeekCast Radio Network. Cowabunga!
Hello and welcome to episode 194 of the Cinema Geeks. I am one of your Cinema Geeks, OptimusSolo, and joining me today is MovieRevolt Dan. Hello.
Hello.
And we are back to talk about more Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So we've already given you episodes on the original live-action movie and the sequel, The Secret of the Ooze. So today we are discussing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, and there is no tag. I don't believe it's just Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3. That's all. The posters, I believe, were advertising the Turtles are back ... in time.
Clever.
So this is a 1993 superhero film, and it was released in March of that year. This is the third movie, and it had a budget of $21 million, made about 54. So I guess it was somewhat of a success. Directed and written by Stuart Gillard, based on obviously the characters from Eastman and Laird. And Dan, what is your history with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3?
So I know last week we talked about how I remember as a kid watching this and not really liking it. And I remember I didn't even think this was released in theaters, but clearly I was wrong. It did. So I just saw it on VHS. So that was, I think, that first and only time I ever watched it. So it was, it's been nearly 30 years since I've seen this. So I was interested to go back to see how much my memory serves. And there's a good amount I remembered, but there's a lot that I really completely forgot.
Yeah, this is the first of the movies I did not see in theaters. So I must have caught up with this at some point on VHS. And I believe I'd only seen it one time until now. And probably should have left it at that one time. Spoiler alert. But let's start with some casting discussion, and then we'll get into the actual film. So we see Paige Turco return as April O'Neil. She was April O'Neil in the second movie as well. We see Elias Koteas, who was Casey Jones in the first one, who wasn't in the second one, now comes back and plays dual roles as Casey Jones and Wit. And then we have a few other, I won't get into all the other human actors that are in here because there's a lot of them. But as far as the main turtles go, Brian Tochi and Robbie Rist return as the voice of Leonardo and Michelangelo. They played the voice in all three films. We have our third different Raphael in this one. And then they brought Corey Feldman back. He was in the first movie. He comes back to voice Donatello in the third film. And other than that, we have James Murray as Splinter, and a couple other changes that we'll, I'm sure, talk about is Jim Henson Company is out for this one. They were heavily involved in the first two films, and they are not involved in this film. It was a different special effects company altogether. So any comments on the casting, the voices, the special effects to start with?
I definitely think you noticed the lack of Jim Henson. I think if anything, that is very, very apparent very quickly. We mentioned last week we talked about Paige Turco as April, and I thought she was kind of nothing in that role. I thought here she actually got some things to do. I didn't even realize she was one that went back in time. I completely forgot about that part. And I thought she did much better in this than the previous film. And overall, I thought the casting had a good amount of solid character actors in some of those smaller roles, even John Aylerwood, who was just one of the random henchmen guys who keeps getting wet willies and stuff like that. So I thought the cast itself, when it comes to classically trained actors, was much better than I remembered it being. I'm not going to say this is Oscar winning per se, but there's some good competent actors in some of the bigger roles.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was happy to see Elias Koteas come back. I love Casey Jones in the first one, but I will say that I don't know. He just is stuck with Splinter. They have Splinter and Casey Jones in this, but they're not really in it. I don't know. What was the point, I guess, in having him come back? I guess he's going to be Splinter's bodyguard for a little while. But so that was kind of weird. I liked that he was back, but he was nowhere near as captivating or didn't bring what I thought he brought in the first film. Not his fault. I'm not saying that is. I mean, that's how the character was written. But
he was much more comic relief in this than anything.
Absolutely. I do think, Paige Turco was probably better in this one. I still think I like other April O'Neil's better, but I don't think that's necessarily her fault. I just don't think she fits what I'm picturing as April O'Neil, and I don't think she has that relationship with the Turtles that we even got in the first, live action film and some other things later on down the road probably. But I thought the voices were fine, but like you said, I think the biggest thing, the glaring thing for me as a kid when this came out and when I finally saw it on VHS was, if this is the third movie in a trilogy, why do all of a sudden the Turtles look completely different than they did in the first two films? So, and it obviously, I didn't know at the time that there was a different company involved. I wouldn't have even known that there was companies that did that. I thought it was just magic or something like that. but it was like, wow, these turtles are really weird. They have a lot of teeth. They have these spots that they didn't have before. They look a lot more like rubbery to me.
Yeah.
And it just was off-putting. I am not just saying that now. I remember thinking that as a kid, like, well, this looks weird to me. So I think it was glaring that the Jim Henson Company was not involved. I just didn't know it at the time. So that was probably the biggest thing for me, as far as from a cast, company, that type of stuff. Any other notes from you on that aspect?
Yeah, the Turtles just had these dead eyes. They just looked, and their mouths moved so poorly. It was like they were. It was being translated or something. Can't think of the word for it. Being dubbed,
like dubbed,
dubbed over with how like bad it was matching up, and really made me appreciate the other two films when it came to the puppeteering, because it was. I mean, there were some pretty there was a couple impressive things when like the overall special effects, in the sense of, when you like more so the stunt people like riding, being in those costumes, riding horses while also wearing samurai gear, like that's a pretty impressive thing to do. Like that had to be hard, and especially one doing it backwards. But that was more so an impressive stunt than impressive set design, or whatever you want to costume design, I guess.
Right. Any take on Splinter? We have obviously a different company doing his effects. We have a different actor in the suit. We are doing the puppeteering. We have a different voice. Any thoughts on Splinter overall?
He looked like a character from Chuck E. Cheese. I felt like the way his his arms really didn't move, and the way he was positioned, it just was really apparent. Like it felt like he was on the stage of Chuck E. Cheese, and I didn't the acting performance I don't think was necessarily bad per se, but the design and the execution of it never felt, even, I mean, that we've been having issues with Splinter this entire time, a little bit better last time. This to me was probably the worst of them three, though.
Yeah, it was weird because it was like the first one, okay, this is the first time you're doing this, and it's a big task, and it looks good, and then the second one you have more money, it's an improvement, so you're not expecting like this drastic turn to not only a different company and a different look, but just what felt like was just amateur in comparison. I'm not saying that they're amateur visual effects. I know it's hard and they probably put a lot of work into it, but just like in comparison, it was like, ooh, we just went down to the minor leagues. And
it's hard to follow Jim Henson. I mean.
Absolutely. I get that part 100%. So the movie begins, obviously we're going to have the setting be in this like 1500 1600 something in Japan. I think it's 1500s, or I don't know, the poster says like 1500s I believe, but then the synopsis I'm reading online says 1603, so I don't know where it's exactly supposed to be, but somewhere in that time period. But just before we get into the actual stuff that happens in the movie, we know what the first movie was kind of based off of, since we've already discussed that. And then the second movie, we're discussing the ooze and kind of that thing and the effects it can have on other characters. What are your thoughts on the idea that, somewhere at some point in time, it was pitched or discussed or whatever, and they're like, I know for the third film, let's go back in time to Japan and base it off of that. Like, where do you sit with that being the like premise of this one?
I honestly don't have an issue with it, because it's been a pretty consistent thing with the Turtles, like them going to feudal Japan. Like, one of my favorite comics is Usagi Yojimbo, and they've often, the comics came out around the same time, and they've often crossed over. There's actually a crossover going on right now. So I thought it made sense. It was something that you would expect with a franchise. I know at that time there was a lot of that going on, especially with like Back to the Future earlier, and and felt like a lot of movies of this ilk of like, The Last of the Mohicans, those kind of like swashbuckling adventure type of films. Of course, this was more of a, I mean, I don't want to say it's a samurai film, but it was I guess more like that. I don't have an issue with it in premise. I guess it's not the most creative idea, perhaps, but in the realm of the mythos of the turtles, it makes sense.
Okay. And then my other question is, we discussed a little bit that obviously in the first movie you get the main villain, you get Shredder, right? We're talking about the most classic villain that the turtles have ever faced. As far as at that time, with the comics and especially the cartoon series, that was the main villain. Krang was probably, 1B, but that's kind of hard to pull off probably in a live action film, unless I guess seems like they tried to do it with the Quantumania here. But so then we talked about the second one. We get Shredder returning. We introduce Toka and Razor, which are kind of like fill-ins for Bebop and Rocksteady in a way, but also kind of somewhat of a new villain that we hadn't seen before in comics or cartoons. And now we get this third one, and there really isn't a cartoon villain. There isn't a villain that we're used to. Like, they didn't kind of tap into any of the cartoon or comics, it doesn't seem like, to pull a notable villain that they could face off against. We're basically dealing with just these characters, these humans that existed in Japan at that time, etc. So how do you feel that either worked or didn't work in a Turtles movie that we're dealing with kind of a nondescript villain, I guess, is how I would put it.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of it was this villain that was just kind of there. Right. As a kid, it bugged me much more because, you want to see some sort of connection to, even if there was something in the sense of like, these were the foot, or like there is some sort of idea of like, this is connecting to what Here was just, it was almost like you had a script and it was made beforehand, and you're like, you know what? Let's just add the turtles to this and we won't change anything else. And that's pretty much because the villains themselves are like, I thought Stuart Wilson's performance as that, it was pretty, I mean, I liked him. I thought he was charismatic. He kind of fit that swarmy, like, guy who's going to backstab anyone. And he had a few, good moments, but character wise, it was definitely not the highlight. And, I could see why being disappointed as a kid. As an adult, it didn't necessarily bother me per se. Like I didn't think they were, villain wise, just looking at how they were as characters, any better or worse than the previous films. Because I know who Shredder is, but it's not like we got outside of the little origin, and there's a little bit more connection there. But I don't think as villains they were that much better or worse than what we got before.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence because part of me is always upset that if there's like a mass library of stuff to choose from, like if there's a ton of content to pick and choose villains for, like, you're only going to do, like, for most properties, they're only possibly going to get one live action film. Maybe some of them will get a handful of them. And they're often dealing, when we're talking about this type of stuff, whether it's based on cartoons, comics, et cetera, they have like a plethora of villains to choose from. Like, you know, if you're taking G.I. Joes, or you're taking He-Man or Turtles or Transformers or anything like that, there's all these different villains that you can pick and choose for, are going to be the centerpiece for your one movie, because you have, 60 or 100 or 200, episodes or comic books that you could take. And so it always kind of bugs me when you don't take from somewhere. But I'm not trying to say like you need to be, I know there's that whole argument about being original or just taking something that's already done, but I think when you're adapting a cartoon or a comic property into a movie, I mean, it would be weird to take a Batman movie, live action movie, and you have no villain from the comic books.
Yeah.
Like, that would just be a strange thing to do. But on the other side of that fence is, you're going back to feudal Japan, where, like, which one would make sense in that setting? Yeah. Is there one at all? I don't know the comics enough to know who you could pull, but even if you took something, I don't know, like, tie it to their origin or tie it to, like, part of me thinks there should have been a way to pull it off. I don't know exactly what that way is, but so I'm kind of like on the fence, but I definitely feel like it's been diminishing returns each movie as far as the villains go, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think if you tried to have someone linked to the foot or something like that, like, but I guess the issue is, like, both armies were kind of caught in the middle with this kind of European pirate trying to manipulate them. So it's like you couldn't make either of them the villain because they weren't necessarily designed to be the villain. So
Right.
I mean, they have in the most recent IDW run, what they've done is kind of added an element of reincarnation, and the idea is that like Splinter and the Turtles were originally alive during that period, and along with the Shredder, and then they were part of like them becoming the Turtles was also part of reincarnation. So they've like, I mean, that'd probably be a lot to do for a movie like this for sure. But I get why people would have an issue with it because, like you said, there's a plenty. You have Kang, but that might, I don't know if they were considering how you had Splinter work. I don't know how well they would be able to do that, or Krang, I called him Kang. Maybe someone like, I guess the issue with some of the other villains, like a Baxter Stockman, require, you have all those different like special effects with mouse hunters or whatever. I can't remember what they're called. So,
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So I guess they kind of just thought, well, we'll just create something new and go from there. There were some ties to like the actual comics because there was that reference to like them coming they were there before, and I believe that was them trying to reference the comics of when they were like. So maybe that's how they were trying to find a happy middle. No, but I don't know. And then you also have the issue with like the legality of some of like who owns what villain. So I don't know if that also played a part too. So I don't know.
Maybe I'm just bitter. I think I always, in my back of my head, wished that like either 2 or 3 would have just been the same thing as 1, still have them in New York, but instead of Shredder, it's like Rat King and like a bunch of rats or something like that.
Yeah,
like, I don't know.
There's I guess maybe they were. I don't know. I know Eastman. I think maybe part of it could be because they were so disjointed. I think about the cartoon and the portrayal of some of those characters that maybe they kind of went the other way, but maybe they went too far. And they just kind of gave us characters like that were just kind of there. Like they weren't poor. They weren't great characters, but they weren't, I wouldn't say, awful. They kind of, it was very like by the book. It was it was obviously this is way before AI was able to write a script, but if you like it kind of feels like that. Like what I mean? It's basic plotting. It's kind of hitting all the beats you would expect with a story. So yeah,
I think one thing that I kind of enjoyed from, and I'm gonna get your take just to see if you believe it exists in this third movie, but in the first 2 films, speaking of the action sequences and the fight scenes and stuff like that, I know there's obviously in the second one they weren't allowed to use any of their weapons, and so it seems like in this third one they immediately at the beginning do like a whole thing where they're showcasing all the different weapons, even though they're not necessarily like attacking anybody with them. And then some of the turtles do get to use their weapons throughout the film, etc. But besides the use of the weapons, or you can key on that, but the first 2 films we got these mass battle sequences with the foot that to me were a great combination of action/comedy, where they were doing different little things, whether it be the sausage with the nunchucks or whether it be some of those types of things. Kind of gives you feelings of like the scene from Indiana Jones with the gun versus the knives or the swords or whatever. And so they did a lot of cool stuff, or at least for a kid I thought fun stuff in the first movie and the second movie where they had that. Now they're obviously fighting not the foot, but in this more samurai setting. Do you feel like they missed an opportunity to do that, or do you feel like they still kind of gave us some of that fun comical action?
It definitely felt a bit more serious. I think it's more akin to the first film in a lot of ways than the second. And I would think that's probably one thing it didn't have a lot, were those fun action sequences, or the action sequences aren't necessarily super memorable. There are a couple bits here and there, like with the cannon and them using their shells and whatnot to but there's not that scene like the opening of either film, or like moment where either I'm having a good time and just enjoying the corniness, or at least thinking, oh, this is well executed. Like I mentioned, there were a few stunts that I thought were pretty impressive in the sense of like just getting them accomplished, but it definitely came off as they were trying to react against the tone of the previous one and like tone things down a bit and make it a little bit more true to life. And it I guess in a way, then it also kind of took the fun out of it in some instances.
That's what I was missing. Like, not only did it look weird to me, but then it didn't feel the same because we didn't get that same type of balance between the seriousness of the first one. The first one still had comedic bits. The second one had a lot of comedic bits, but I just didn't feel like we got any of that balance to me. It just kind of felt like we were trudging along, kind of like you said.
It was much more in the dialogue here than even, although some of the really bad ADR dialogue, which was so like, felt like they were just throwing whatever they could against the wall. Sometimes
I did enjoy the talk about your quantum leap line.
Yeah.
That was one I liked, and I think the closest they got was what you kind of referred to when he goes down in the shell to be missed by things, and then then I love being a turtle or whatever. Like that was like the closest to me it got to feel like some of the stuff we would have gotten from those turtles in the first two films. So go ahead.
Even the climax, like I do think one thing that's been consistent, maybe outside of the first one, was like they're really bad at finding satisfying ways to get rid of their villains. They like people falling and falling into water. Like it's like this one had both, but
I would have thought in 1993 we could have done the visuals of somebody falling in water correctly. Like he falls and then he just like disappears.
Yeah. And it's also they're also weirdly like the turtles aren't ever the ones that really come out on top. They're not the ones like solving the problem. They're usually just bystanders. Like things end up happening. Like they just happen to be there sometimes, which is kind of funny.
Right.
So
I also missed the music that
I
had loved in the first two films as a kid. I liked the music in the first two films. I don't know if I love it now, but like I didn't get like it was that it didn't. So not only are we not in the New York setting, which is what we're kind of familiar with. Not saying you can't do a successful like time travel Japan story, and I'm not saying like you pointed out they did do that in the comics, so it makes sense. But like you're already taking us out of the New York setting that we're used to. You're taking the music away that we're used to. You're taking some of the fun comic stuff. Not that I want it to go as far as the second film did, but you're taking that away. And then you have turtles that just look completely different, and the visual effects seem like a complete downgrade. So like I'm somewhat shocked that this movie made any money.
Turtles were at that point, Plus,
yeah, I mean, I get like 1993. The Turtles have been around now for 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, something like that. And so it was started, this isn't coming out at like their peak.
Yeah.
So to speak. But I'm just surprised, with some of those things that it did as well. It opened at number 1 at the box office, according to the internet, with a gross of 12 million, grossed 54 million total. So I'm surprised. I didn't realize that. I thought this one was more of a financial flop than I guess it wasn't 100%. So
yeah, it also came out in March, which is a pretty big dumping ground off, even more so back then. So that could also be why. I don't know what it was going up against, but probably
the critics were not nice to this. Obviously, like this is my thing though. Like critics are already going to be hard on, especially during this time period. This is before Marvel somewhat changes things, at least temporarily. And some of not Marvel, I guess more so maybe the Christopher Nolan Batman films changed things a little bit. But before then, if a movie came out that was based on a video game or a cartoon or something, as a general rule of thumb, critics weren't going to score it real well.
Yeah.
So that's fine and dandy. But to me, it's not just like the 19% that it has on Rotten Tomatoes. To me, it's more like you even lost the nerds that, like myself, that are into this. Like you can't do both. Like it's fine, to heck with the critics. You can put out a fun movie that works for the audience that's geared towards, but like if it doesn't work for that, then it's like, oof, you're like 0 for 2. But apparently Kevin Eastman liked it. So he said, this is a quote from him. He says, "What we tried to do with the third movie was to make it as good of a story as we could. We went through a painstaking level of do's and don'ts, what they could and couldn't do. We wanted something that would be good for all ages again. I call movie 1 the best, movie 2 the worst, and movie 3 halfway in between." That's Kevin Eastman from 2014. Is that how you would rank them?
Honestly, yeah. I think the lows aren't as low with me in this one, and like I said, it maybe gets a bit too serious. Maybe it's not like it doesn't have that much fun. I wouldn't say this is a good movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought like there's good bits in it. Like I thought they had better character moments here. Like I felt Raph having like that time he's spending with a kid about just being a kid and not being a soldier already, or even like Michelangelo and like having to be on his own for a bit. And again, I felt like Donatello actually had moments to be like the Donatello that I remember of, like the tech guy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I thought it was more competently made. Like I said, I wouldn't, this isn't, and even like the opening shot, I was watching this. I'm like, am I in the right movie? Because the opening shot is actually pretty well done. Like with the sun setting in the background, it's a pretty gorgeous scene. It's probably the highlight of the movie, but it's like the best looking scene of the movie. But and even like the sets and things like that, I thought of the time, like it did feel like, considering this, like it did feel like they attempted to make it feel like they were back at that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one thing, of course, is that there aren't as many standout. There's nothing like when I mentioned as a kid, I didn't remember much of it, and still even here I can't point to a lot of moments. There's like it seems like all the comedy, as we mentioned earlier, was reserved for Casey Jones and and the like the other people that were like lost in time, and that kind of rare thin a little bit. Although I did like the hockey reference, that was nice. But yeah, I think I could see why, because this is much more akin to like what he made with the comics compared to like the second film, which was really, really goofy. And but again, it's not like I would give this a 5 stars or anything like that. It's like I have no desire to ever watch it again. But I don't know if it was just low expectations, but I'm like, this is much better than I had thought it was going to be, just because it wasn't the worst thing ever. So
yeah, I think when I think about the 3 films, and again, this one I had seen the fewest times, and I hadn't seen it, I don't think, since the 90s. And I don't necessarily think the second or the third film are good films at all. I think, like you said, this one is definitely probably darker, probably more akin to what the comic books were and what they kind of were going for, and took out a little bit of the immature humor and things of that nature that especially we saw prevalent in the second one. I will watch the first one again for sure. Like, I can say that. Like, there will be a time in the future where I think, oh, let's put the first Turtles movie on and I'm going to watch it again. Like, that will happen. I guarantee it. So I'm a big fan of the first one, regardless of whatever you might want to critique out of it. It's just something that I think is a good time. It's entertaining, humorous, and it takes me back, and I enjoy it from a nostalgia standpoint or whatever. I don't know if I'll ever watch the second one again, but I think there would be like a 1% higher chance of me watching the second one again than me watching this one again.
Yeah, I can.
I'm not making that doesn't mean the second film is a better film. Like I said, I think from a competency standpoint, maybe this third film was better made, and it did take, they did do a good job making it look like it was from the time period, and there was probably some more choreographing done and things of that nature. So I think there's aspects of the third film that probably make it a better executed film from like a fundamental standpoint, but I don't think I would enjoy a rewatch of the third one. Not that I'm going to enjoy immensely a rewatch of the second one, but like give it like a 1 or 2% bump on the rewatchability.
Yeah, I think the second film, when it fails, and it like a just kind of out there interesting way. It's the difference between like an adequate success versus an interesting failure. The second one, I think, is, failure might be strong, but there's those moments where it's like Vanilla Ice, and where it goes. It's just the absurdity keeps your interest. Where this never had that absurdity, so it makes for maybe a bit more forgettable experience, but at least it was maybe more not as embarrassing in a way. I don't know how you frame it. Although, like you said, some of the puppeteering and stuff like that is hard to watch at times, because it's just, you can't look directly at the turtles, otherwise it doesn't work.
My wife walked through the room. Amanda walked through the room when I was watching. I kind of watched this in a couple pieces, and when I was watching the last bit of it, she walked through and she's like, "Why did the turtles look like that?" I was like, "Yeah, that kind of sums it up."
You know,
So,
there was one scene though, because I didn't want to talk, but I know we're about to wrap up, but I wanted
you're
to mention
good.
it. It was so in 2022 standards, it just really stands out. Was this that you had that guard who was a bigger guard, and they went in on the fat jokes like really
Oh
hard,
yeah.
like
hmm
just countless. Like man, they are not stopping with this guy. It's just like
That's
wow,
something
it
you would
was
have more expected in the second film, but they,
yeah. I was like
yeah,
it was a different time. I mean, there were, and also I gotta say, wanted to. I need to. I'm not gonna go back and do it, but I kind of wish I had a running list of the references they make because it is the most eclectic group, like amount of things. You mentioned Quantum Leap. There's like old school references to like you know um, Maltese Falcon. It's just it runs the gamut, but I guess it makes sense because they're probably in the sewers watching whatever comes on
yeah.
TV, so that's kind of what they know. But it's interesting because I don't know as a kid if I picked up a lot of those different references.
Right, right. So there were initially plans for a fourth installment. Obviously, the first film did great. The second film did great. The third film still made money. So there was initial plans for a fourth film. It was going to be somewhere in the maybe 96 area, mid 90s still. Obviously, it never happened. There was a couple different ideas that I saw in looking on different sites on the internet as far as what they were going to do. One of them apparently was titled TMNT 4 The Foot Walks Again. Another was having to deal with the next mutation, which obviously becomes a terrible looking TV series in 97, 98. But so there were ideas about a fourth film. They don't happen. Instead, we have to wait to have a CGI animated film in 2007 and then a reboot in 2014. Do you think there would have been any room for a fourth film? Are you glad that they kind of stopped now, gave us a break and until the reboot, 10 years, more than 10 years later? Or do you think it would have been interesting to see them try something else? Or what are your thoughts on kind of how they
I would
went?
be interested to see like what they could do, but also thinking back at that live action TV series and how bad that was, like like where would they go? The Foot comes back with that, bringing back Shredder and I guess whoever.
Right.
I don't know. Like I feel like it would have, because they're probably not getting Jim Henson back. So and the fact that this made like even less money, they're probably going to have an even smaller budget. So I
Right.
could only imagine that it was probably a better idea for the entire franchise to take a step back and
I agree.
wait and just go the animated route. I'll say that as I never actually have seen TMNT from 2007, so it'll be the first time I've
Oh,
watched
you
it.
haven't?
No,
Okay.
I've never watched it before.
So this is interesting then, because what Turtles is doing, Turtles is like this interesting property, interesting franchise. We talked about this probably a little bit in the first episode we were covering, but they have multiple things going on at the same time, right? Like there's the comics, which are going on at different times, and there's been different, lines of that. And then there's the movies that we're talking about currently, and then there's the animated series, or the live action series as well. And they're all like debuting in different years and things of that nature. So it's kind of interesting when we're just looking at the movies to see that, because we know at this point we've had the original comics and we've had the 87 cartoons. And up to that point, this is all that's existed. We just mentioned that we do get the next mutation series in the like 96, 97 era. And then Turtles really takes a break until after the 2000s. And the way the timeline goes is there was a new television series in 2003 and a new one in 2012, and then there's been obviously more than that, but the next two are 2003 and 2012. The movies are 2007 and 2014. So we have the other series drop first, be around for about 4 years before we get this 2007 film. So I'm interested to see that, and I'm almost tempted to go watch just a couple episodes of each of these cartoon series just to see like where we were at in that as well, because it takes on this whole new thing where there's so many multiple channels of stuff going on in different mediums, and that's I think what's kept the Turtles relevant and happening to this day. Like we already have a new film coming out this year. We have the animated series seem to like just continue to reinvent themselves. So it'll be interesting to see, because it's really hard at this point to have seen everything that's been out. So you said you have not seen the 2007 movie. Have you seen any of the other TV series?
I watched the 2003 TV series when it came out.
Okay.
I've seen there was a Turtles Lost. I forget whatever the
Forever
TV for Turtles Forever. I did watch that back when we were doing the animated movie countdown, just because I heard because we talked about it in that episode. So I went back and watched it because I never saw it before. But yeah, I watched a little bit of that. I remember watching it and being like, "This is not what I remember," because it was so serious. But liking it, I enjoyed that 2003 series. But I don't know why I just never watched it in 2007. Just one of those things where like, I'll catch it eventually, and then I didn't, and then I thought I heard people say it wasn't good, but I don't know. I don't know what the overall thought about it is per se, because who knows if sometimes I feel like with the Turtles, the further you are away from certain things, the more people like it. So
Right.
yeah. But I haven't watched any of the newer series at all. Like you have the other one
Right.
from Nickelodeon that was like in the one you mentioned, but that
2012.
one 2012, I didn't watch that one, and I didn't watch the most recent one.
The Rise of the Teenage
Rise.
Mutant
I
Ninja
did
Turtles.
try to watch the Netflix movie a little bit, but I was completely lost, so I ended up not. I just kind of like but that also kind of inspired me. Like I need to go back and because there's so much content. I mean, when this Turtle 3s came out, I thought, well, that's the end of the Turtles. We're not going to see them again, and then
Right.
here we are. And there's like you mentioned, there's just it never stops.
Right, absolutely. So I believe I've only seen the 2007 film once, just like with this Turtles 3 one. So that'll be interesting for a first time watch for you and a second time watch, but a first time in a long time for me for the 2007 one when we discussed that. Dan, anything else that you wanted to talk about Turtles 3 or anything else before we close this one out?
No, you can catch my stuff on all the platforms, social media, Instagram, TikTok at Comic Concierge. Hear my thoughts. I hope hopefully we maybe doing some videos in correspondence with these episodes, so you can look for those there.
Awesome. And then for my stuff, you can check out Geek Showcase on YouTube or on Twitter, or you can always check out Geekcast Radio Network and see what they are up to as well. We got some cool things planned for later in the year that you might be interested in that might even involve turtles. Who knows? So this has been Optimus Solo. He is the Comic Concierge, and we will be back next time to talk more Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, this time in 2007.